Hi everyone. I wanted to give you an update on the developments with the former Pfizer World Headquarters that's being converted to 1,600 residential units. Buildings are located at 235 East 42nd Street and 219 East 42nd Street in Midtown Manhattan. There have been a number of developments. It's really a slow motion disaster, at least economically, I think. I'm going to go through that. Although it looks like the major risk of catastrophic collapse has been avoided. Near term, anyway, it looks like the building has reached equilibrium to some degree after at least two structural steel columns were observed to have failed on the 21st floor. Today's video, I'm going to go over the comments. Many of you had excellent comments and questions about what's going on with this situation, questions about some of the official statements that have been made. So I'm going to address those comments. I also have an interesting satellite evaluation that was done by Valuespace. They've supported a number of my videos doing INSAR satellite analysis based on the Sentinel-1 and 2 satellites from the European Space Agency. They've analyzed the building movement patterns for these two buildings, the former Pfizer World Headquarters, and have come up with some interesting trends that I'll cover here a little bit later on in this video. So in this photo, we're looking at the building here that's had a number of stories added to the existing building at 235 East 42nd Street. And it looks like in excess of 15 stories of this new building addition, as well as a few stories of the former building, are going to have to be removed and replaced. And as I mentioned, in the morning of July 7th, 2026, I'm recording this on July 10th, 2026, at least two structural steel columns were observed to have failed. That is, they buckled near their midpoint on the 21st floor. I also had commented that there appeared to be a lot of corrosion on this structural steel member that was revealed after some of this fireproofing, spray applied fireproofing, had spalled off. And some of you question whether this fireproofing, given the construction age, that this building was built in 1959 to 1961 when it opened, whether it contained asbestos. I don't know at this point, but that would certainly add an additional complication to this situation, as I expect they're going to have to go through this building quite extensively and look at the condition of other structural steel columns to find out if they're distressed, if there's excess deformation, if there's corrosion, and just get a much better evaluation of what the condition is of this building. So this picture was taken from a Fire Department of New York drone. The buckled columns are located on the 21st floor. You have this 22nd floor here, which is opened, and then these new additions, these additional floors to take the building up to the 37th floor. And it appears that far too much load was transferred to the steel columns that were formerly at the uppermost floor of this building. As we go higher up in the new portion of the building that was added on the last couple of years, you can see excessive tilting of these floors. The developer indicated that their measurements indicated that there was 4 inches of floor slab sag, and it looks to be far more than that, as a number of you commented on, in excess of 10 inches. And I believe that as well, just given the amount of distortion that occurred with the structural steel columns as well as the non-structural steel wall studs that were in the building. The developer, the main developer here, Nathan Berman, has made, as I mentioned in a previous video, a lot of ridiculous comments in my opinion, and he continues to make a lot of comments. But at this point, he's acknowledged that they're planning on reconstructing 15 floors across the project. I think it's going to be more than that. He's talking about replacing the facade, slabs, and steel. And of course, since this discovery of the failed structural steel columns, the contractor's been busy shoring floors above and below this location on the 21st floor. And a number of you commented that you would have expected that that shoring would have extended all the way to ground level. There's been some mixed reporting on that. I saw some reports indicating that they were only going to go down to the 9th floor, which seems odd to me, but they've got a lot of work on their hands before them. And this developer Berman indicates that before this mishap, as he calls it, which it's way more than a mishap, that the project was 2 months ahead of schedule, and with these corrective actions of removing 15 or more floors and replacing them. He thinks that's only going to take 2 months, so that they'll end up still meeting their original schedule, which I very much doubt. Let's go back to some of these statements that he made to the New York Times. There's some real gems in here, in my opinion. This incident is nothing more than a typical construction mishap. This is far from typical, in my opinion. I mean, it's uh, an economic disaster at the very least. I'm surprised too he's mentioned that they're going full tilt into removing these floors and replacing them when they really haven't yet discovered the full extent of what problems may exist throughout this building. The previous building that was built in 1960, as well as all these new additions, these additional floors that were installed in the last 2 years. And he also makes this weird statement saying, he said the engineering and design of the project, which were approved by the city, were perfect. Well, something wasn't perfect here, far from it. Now, not to be outdone, there are representatives of local unions there, the laborers union and the steamfitters union, that have, in my mind, also made pretty goofy statements. They're really aggressively asserting that the problem with this building occurred solely because they weren't using union labor, the contractor. It's an open shop, so it's a mix of union and non-union workers. And my problem with these union reps, this is a steam fitters representative, a business agent with that local there, asserts very directly that it was because the project wasn't entirely union that led to this problem, and he didn't offer any specific evidence to back up that assertion, which I think is irresponsible. It may be that there was some workmanship problems that led to this uh, partial collapse, if you will, the failure of these structural steel columns. But again, if you're not going to offer up any evidence, just keep quiet, in my view, and let the forensic engineers, the structural engineers, do a thorough, complete evaluation and issue the report. And then we'll go from there. And ironically, the discovery of these failed structural steel columns was apparently made by a member of this steamfitters union, Local 638. Let's just play this short segment from CBS New York.
This is irresponsible contracting.
The Steamfitters Union blames the sagging floors and bending columns on the job mostly being non-union workers. The developer Metroloft told me by phone Wednesday the issue had nothing to do with non-union work.
There may have been some human error involved, or there may have been some inherent issue with those particular two columns.
So that was Mr. Berman again. Now, the New York Department of Buildings has indicated that there's a thorough investigation going on as to what happened here. I don't think that people can be fully confident that the risk of any danger to the public has been averted from the mere fact that they have still closed 43rd Street between 2nd Avenue and 3rd Avenue. At any rate, I would encourage the Department of Buildings of New York City to make a full release of all the forensic evaluation reports that will be forthcoming into what caused this whole episode with the collapsed structural steel columns. And I think what's likely to happen is that these forensic evaluation reports are likely to indicate that there are multiple aspects that led up to the failure of these structural steel columns. I mean, even if you could say that, oh, it was a labor issue, where are the redundancies with the whole process? I mean, it would seem to point to a systemic problem with the construction of this building. If you had a labor issue, as an example, why wouldn't the special inspectors pick up on it? Where are representatives of the design engineer on site to ensure that their assumptions about the condition of these structural steel elements or the sequencing of construction is consistent with their design? So far, we're only hearing from the developer, this Mr. Berman. I haven't seen any statements issued by the architect Gensler or the structural engineer GACE or the construction manager, Collaborative Construction Management LLC. Their website indicates that they have extensive experience converting commercial office space into residential units. So let's clear up some of the confusion about what was done and where with this building. This is a satellite view from Google. We have 2nd Avenue on the right, 42nd Street to the south side of this block, and 43rd Street to the north, and then 3rd Avenue to the west. And this graphic came from the New York Times, which gives you an overall feel for what's going on. They showed the building at the 235 address going from 33 to 37 stories, but I'm going to come back to that, and the building at 219 having the addition of 19 stories. But there's an important thing here, and that's this cutout, this former rooftop area. That's where additional stories were added to take it from the 21st floor to the 37th floor. And this is the area that filled. We're looking at it from the street view here, but you can see these additions, these additional floors off to the right, built on top of that former roof area. And this is the floor, the 21st floor, that had the structural steel columns fill. Just another view of that here. We have this upper floor here, the 21st floor, and then these new floors going on top. There's a view of one of the 2 structural steel columns that buckled. When they buckle, they can't be relied on to carry any overlying load from all those additional floors. Once the New York Department of Buildings said it was safe enough for workers to re-enter the building, they immediately started installing shoring to brace the floors in the location of this 21st floor, as well as for underlying floors. Of course, engineers are in the building doing extensive inspection work, but these are some of the braces that they installed from the beams to the floor to transfer the load that would have been taken by these columns. Just a drawing from the plan showing the stair-step nature of this portion of the building. Now, a number of you commented that you thought the additional live loading from stored construction materials could have contributed to the failure of these structural steel columns. And I think that's a possibility if you had that situation on all the overlying or many of the overlying floors. But it's a fair point that there's a lot more loading to be added to this building with the installation of all the fixtures, bathtubs, cabinets, countertops, you name it, anything that goes to finishing out an apartment unit. That would all be part of what's called a dead load. Anything that is transient, here today, gone tomorrow, furniture, for example, although you would expect furniture to exist in some form over a long period of time. I'm thinking more of say, an office building, which the existing building was. There was a lot of, no doubt, filing cabinets, and those impart what would be called a live load. So any load that may change its configuration or be removed at a future point would be considered a live load. Here's a photo taken during construction. You can see these additional stories to take the building from 21 floors to 37 floors in this portion that was formerly an open rooftop. And I've seen a lot of comments from people on YouTube that indicate that they're engineers, and some of them indicated that they thought those upper columns on the 21st floor might have been smaller than columns lower in the building. I haven't seen any direct evidence of that, although I suspect that will no doubt be addressed in any forensic evaluation report that will be forthcoming. A number of you also commented that you thought it was sheer folly to add additional floors to a building that wasn't designed for those number of floors. And it turns out it's rather common. I mean, it seems rather shocking, but buildings typically have tremendous amount of redundancy. So they have excess capacity to carry loads beyond what they're designed for. And I think in the era that predates a lot of these computer-aided designs, the designs weren't as optimized as they are now, so you had larger margins of safety typically. But at any rate, I have no doubt that the engineering process for converting this building from office space to residential units was quite rigorous. It went through a review process. But the question is, what went wrong? I mean, certainly the designer would know that when you add anywhere from 10 to 19 floors to an existing building that wasn't designed for that, you have to check the loading on all the members, the structural members, to see if they can withstand that additional loading. So again, I can't say for sure that it was a design issue. It might be a combination of things. in terms of assumptions that were made for the design that may not have been valid based on the condition of the building or the sequence of construction. We'll have to see. Now, one thing I want to talk about, the media used a lot of terms incorrectly. So what failed were structural steel columns. And this diagram, and this is of a different building, but the pink vertical members are the columns. And the green horizontal members are the beams. So you have the floor loads, the floor slabs that transfer the load to the beams, and the beams transfer the load to the columns. A number of you ask, well, if there was that much deflection of multiple floors in this building, most notably apparently between the 21st and the 26th floors, why didn't the windows fail? In these type of high-rise buildings, the building facade is what's called a curtain wall. It's a separate system. It's a non-load-bearing system. Its frame is designed to carry the loading of the cladding, whether it's masonry or glass. This curtain wall is attached to the building, but again, it's not carrying the loads from the building proper. So again, I'm waiting for the forensic report to identify whether there were design issues for this building expansion. Was there a misunderstanding of the condition of the structural members? Was there poor workmanship? Was there a lack of following proper construction sequencing based on the design requirements of the engineer? Was there a lack of proper inspections? Was there a lack of proper city oversight? Now, getting back to the satellite analysis that was sent to me by Valuespace, it's quite interesting. Now, I'm just going to go through their analysis. Pause the video at these locations if you want to study these slides in more detail. So they went back over about a 6-year period and looked at the deflections across the footprint of the building at the roof level. And they note that the building began to exhibit an amplified seasonal thermal movement pattern from around the start of construction activities in spring of 2024. So the brown line is temperature, and these are normal seasonal fluctuations with the highest temperatures occurring during the summer, as you would expect in the northern hemisphere. And you see these green lines that show some erratic behavior, increased movement above what has been historically the case during these seasonal variations. Now, Valuespace isn't saying conclusively that increased temperatures in the building that was being retrofitted, because you're removing the existing air conditioning. So the building is essentially experiencing ambient air temperatures. And when you increase the temperature of a structural steel member, you get thermal expansion. Materials have what's called a coefficient of thermal expansion, and you can actually calculate the increase in length of, say, a structural steel column subject to an increase in temperature. But if those members are fixed because of connections to floors and beams, then it would produce an increase in stress. So Valuespace points to the possibility that this may have been a contributing factor to increasing the stresses in the building columns. They don't state that conclusively. They suggest that it's a clear area of additional investigation, and I agree with that. But I did pull up the historical temperatures. It was quite hot in the days leading up to the buckling of these structural steel columns. So the lead up over the 4th of July weekend, it was about 100 degrees in New York City. So I think Valuespace could be onto something here. And as a basis of comparison, they looked at a building directly across the street, a hotel building, and it doesn't exhibit these types of movements. Now, some of you commented, and I thought it was a great idea, is why aren't they installing, they being the engineer and the city and all those involved with this project, sensors, that is strain gauges and possibly accelerometers, to measure the condition of the building as these overlying floors are constructed. So for example, if you install strain gauges to the structural steel members for the columns, you can measure the additional stresses as overlying floors are constructed, and you could make sure that those stresses don't exceed what you had calculated as part of your design. That type of structural health monitoring is common for bridge projects. I don't know how common it is for buildings. I think it's quite uncommon actually, but I think it's something that should be considered more on a routine basis. These sensors are relatively cheap, and I think something like that system could have provided an early warning that stresses in these building columns exceeded what was permissible and certainly led to their failure. But here's an example of a structural health monitoring system that was installed for an existing bridge in Rhode Island, the existing eastbound Washington bridge that is now carrying two-way traffic for a total of 6 lanes, which it wasn't originally designed for. So I hope that addresses a number of your questions. Please leave your comments. Let me know what you think. If you have additional areas that you want me to explore for future video updates. With that, I want to do a book mention since we're talking about New York. This book here was written by Saul Bellow, Seize the Day. It was a rather interesting book set in New York, as I mentioned, that really shows how this individual, the main character's life, took a turn for the worse because he basically fouled up all the important relationships throughout his life. I thought it was a rather interesting book. Plan to read more of his. This is the first book of Saul Bellows that I've read. With that, I want to send a shout out to those of you who've contributed to buy me a coffee. That's one of the better ways to support this channel. I also want to thank the channel members and those of you who've contributed to Super Thanks, and those of you who have commented and sent me links to various aspects of this news story. So stay tuned, everyone.